In Florida, if you want to do anything, it requires water. For 8,800 square miles of eastern Florida, that water is connected to the St. Johns River. Who gets to use that water and the consequences of how it's used, well, that's decided by who has the best connections to state government. I'm Bruce Hamilton. Florida law says this water is your water. This is an hour-long discussion about how this water is managed and the connections and consequences your children will have to live with for their entire lives. To begin, it's important to understand how all of the water in Florida is connected. You may not look at the St. Johns River and immediately think of the water that comes to your kitchen sink, but they are irrevocably connected. The consequences of harm to one eventually flow to the other. Most of our drinking water comes from the underground river known as the Floridan Aquifer. The aquifer is considered groundwater. Wetlands, creeks, lakes, and rivers are called surface water. 54 inches of annual rain and storm water that runs off of the land and pavement flows into them. But while the St. Johns and all of its tributaries are surface water, they're also fed by the aquifer through more than 100 springs. Wetlands and undeveloped land filter the water and allow it to soak into the Floridan aquifer, and your public utility taps it, treats it, and transports it to your faucet. Along the way, as water makes that big circle, man steps in. Agriculture, industry, real estate, cities, and homeowners with septic tanks. More than 1.2 million septic tanks line the St. Johns, its tributaries, and springs. During September 2016, evidence of the connection between the surface and the aquifer was exposed in a most dramatic way. A pond of effluent from the Mosaic fertilizer plant in Mulberry, Florida, opened a sinkhole that drained 215 million gallons of contaminated water into the aquifer. Whether or not there will be consequences for the drinking water for Polk County remains to be seen. This sinkhole event may be tragic, but throughout the St. Johns watershed, the river and aquifer are continuously absorbing massive amounts of fertilizer from agriculture, organic and chemical pollution from industries including Georgia Pacific and from the largest utility on the river, the Jacksonville Electric Authority. There are two state agencies that are primarily charged with managing both surface water and groundwater. The Department of Environmental Protection, DEP, is concerned with the levels of pollution in water across the state. When it comes to the quantity of water for 18 eastern counties, the St. Johns River Water Management District decides who gets to take the water, how much they can take, and how it's used. Through projects like the Upper St. Johns River Basin Project, the Water Management District is mitigating existing pollution by restoring land from agriculture to wetlands and marshes. This project, more than 30 years in the making, at a cost of $250 million, encompasses more than 166,000 acres. But will that, and the other restoration projects underway, be enough to mitigate the insatiable demand for growth and development? And will there be the will to pay for projects occupying that much land? Because just as surface water and drinking water are connected in Florida, so are growth and politics.
So it's not just Seminole County, it's all Central Florida, and in turn it's all Florida. And the one thing that we have to come to grips with is that our economy is based on growth. Growth, though, has to be managed.
We pretty much dismantled much of our growth management system and our system of environmental protection. We don't have the scientists who are there to call upon to help us with this anymore.
In the last 6 or 8 years, the state has undone many of the environmental protections that previous legislatures had enacted.
In the next segment of Troubled Waters, we'll find out what pollution looks like, what can't be seen, and the effect it can have on your health and your wallet.
A green algae outbreak, a green monster, could happen at any time under the right conditions.
And in the river, we've identified at least 4 types of toxins. 2 of them are hepatotoxins, which will target the organs like the liver.
It is incumbent upon us as leaders, as elected officials, to come to terms with the fact that if we don't protect Florida's resources, our economy is going to, suffer and potentially collapse.
What's better than a value meal with 6 of Crystal's new, juicy, boneless wings tossed in barbecue or buffalo sauce? Getting it for just $3 boneless and 99 boneless cents, only for a limited time.
Shun the ho hum.
My husband was in an automobile accident. We wanted some legal representation.
Todd, he explained everything, like line by line, word for word.
You know, like your primary physician, we would consider him our primary attorney.
Visit our website at toddhenrylaw.com. Our office is located on Kingsley Avenue in Orange Park. We're here for you.
When your holidays have a Hemi engine, there's no faster way to trim a tree. Great deals all month long at the Dodge Black Friday event. Now get 20% off MSRP cash allowance for an average of $8,040 in savings on select 2016 Charger RT models in dealer stock.
For any of y'all who recently had an accident and you're still feeling pain, whether it's neck and lower back pain, numbness and tingling to your arms or legs, you were injured from that accident, and those injuries require treatment. You have 14 days to see a doctor or you lose your insurance benefits. Call me. I'll answer all your questions, provide you with everything you need from your first day to your last day. So take care of your injuries now and call me, Doc Tony, at 1-888-888-8863. And remember, Jacksonville, I'm more than a catchy number. I'm real.
Monday on River City Live, we're joined by Mayor Curry and his wife for our newlywed game.
So how do you think they're going to answer questions like, where was your first kiss, and what's the mayor's most irritating habit?
And flea market steals and deals in time for Black Friday. That is on Monday at 11 here on 4.
A grotesque green goo, squirting a vile primordial juice all over our river.
This is not good.
The green monster, it came from the river.
When you cannot access our waterways due to toxic green slime, it's not only an environmental crisis, it's also an economic emergency.
A decade ago, the Green Monster documentary chronicled the massive green slime that covered the surface of this river through downtown Jacksonville. The Green Monster feeds on an overabundance of nutrients. Over the last 10 years, there have been efforts to reduce those nutrients. How well are they working?
Visit Florida is not going to show this on the website. This is bad for the economy.
This river is sick with too much nutrient pollution, so it's a ticking time bomb. A green algae outbreak, a green monster could happen at any time under the right conditions.
When there are too many nutrients in the river and you have a combination of the nutrients and increased temperature, then you start to get the perfect conditions for blooms.
While blooms and nutrients might sound healthy, even pretty or harmless, this green stuff is not. It's actually a bacteria and can be toxic. This past summer's heat combined with too many nutrients cooked up the dangerous recipe in the St. Lucie and Indian River Lagoon.
The most recent major event was in April of this year when we had a massive fish kill where more than 100,000 pounds of fish floated to the surface.
The deadly green also showed up on parts of the St. Johns River just south of Jacksonville in Crescent Lake, Doctor's Lake, and here at the mouth of Walaka Springs. Water samples taken revealed toxins exceeding harmful toxic levels established by the World Health Organization.
Some states have standards, some of them don't. Florida does not. We don't have standards for drinking water or recreational for any of the 4 major toxins that we find in the water.
Robert Burks trains volunteers to detect the toxic green stuff called cyanobacterial harmful algae blooms, or CHAB. Precautions like wearing gloves are a must when taking test samples.
Bring it back up. Remember, don't fill it all the way up.
Some of those toxins target organs like the liver, some the nervous system and the muscles that control breathing. So it's really best not to touch, ingest, or breathe in any of the contaminants from that toxic algae bloom. It can have an array of health effects on people and can even kill pets, wildlife, and fish.
But the problem is you have small children, which, because they're a smaller body mass, it's going to be more toxic to them than perhaps an adult.
Even the state sees the toxic outbreak as a problem.
What have we done to prevent the clean monster? And that's what we did 8 years ago. We signed a Basin Management Action Plan. We gave everybody their assignments. They've reduced nutrients 90%.
90% is 90% of the goal that they established for reducing nutrients in the river. But unfortunately, that goal was set way too low. The pollution problem is a much bigger problem than our regulatory agencies want to admit and want to address. We have to do much better if we're going to clean up the St. Johns River and prevent these pollution problems and prevent these algal blooms that we're seeing happen all over our state.
Everyone has chipped in and done their parts. Some had to be reminded, but as a result, we've seen greatly improved water quality. We're not seeing those significant algal blooms anymore.
Well, that depends on your definition of significant.
This is the green monster. This is the Welaka Spring where I bring people out on my eco-heritage tours. And this used to be a beautiful, clear spring. This is some of the water right out of the spring run here. And it's just dark and green and covered with algae. I would never bring anybody on a tour out here unless they were, taking a sample.
The water tested from Welaka Spring the day after our interview with Florida's DEP showed toxin levels the World Health Organization associates with a high risk of acute health effects from recreational exposure. And a sample taken here at Doctors Lake last summer shows toxin levels 100 times higher than the WHO standard.
These isolated events have been highly toxic and demonstrate that the pollution is there if the conditions are ripe for an outbreak of intense size. It could happen at any moment because this algae is just the symptom. The nutrient pollution is the cause.
These are generated from agricultural runoff primarily, and also from people putting fertilizers on their yards and from septic tanks.
Nutrients occur naturally in the river, but it's when they're fueled by all this excess, that's when these outbreaks happen. But the root cause, which is the pollution, sadly is widespread throughout the St. Johns River.
80% of the problem is what we call sheet runoff. It's the stuff that just kind of runs off the land when it rains. You get a huge thunderstorm, it all washes all that stuff into the river. If I have a benevolent dictator, the one thing I would ban is St. Augustine grass.
This bright green grass is St. Augustine. It requires more watering, fertilizer, and pesticide than other grasses that are more drought tolerant. And since we're watering it more, that means that fertilizer, pesticide, and grass clippings are flowing into our waterways.
We use millions of pounds of fertilizer every year in the state, and that fertilizer is ending up in our drinking water, our groundwater, and then in our springs.
I think we should be horribly worried about our springs. The springs are a mess.
Silver River now, because of the nitrogen fertilization in the spring shed, is putting out about 600 tons per year of nitrogen. And that's like a dump truck of fertilizer being dumped in the head spring every day coming out of the aquifer. And that nitrogen has effects all the way downstream in the Ocklawaha and the St. Johns River.
While fertilizing, watering, and mowing your lawn contributes to that mess through stormwater runoff, there's an even greater threat lurking just below the turf.
Nitrogen is what causes your algae blooms. Nitrogen is what causes your fish kills. Nitrogen is the problem, and septic tanks contribute massive amounts of nitrogen.
In this county, Volusia County, we have 100,000 septic tanks. Most of them, have input or into the St. Johns River watershed. That's releasing nutrients into the system.
Gemini Springs is one of at least 5 Florida springs actually closed to swimming because the water quality is considered unsafe.
It has fecal coliform bacteria, and we've also found all kinds of pharmaceuticals and other chemicals that have found their way into the springs. It's when you flush the toilet, this all goes right back in the environment. When we put an artificial sweetener in our coffee, both the caffeine and the sucralose, that chemical, washes right out into the water stream, and you can measure it in the spring.
And there's kind of a fallacy that only malfunctioning septic tanks are bad. All septic tanks are bad when they're in high enough concentrations near bodies of water.
Yet here in Florida, there are 2.7 million of them. And that's the reason for signs like this.
And I want to emphasize the health of the tributaries because that's where the septic tanks have the greatest negative impact. And what you'll see in Jacksonville are many tributaries that are posted with signs that say, caution, fecal coliform contamination.
Jacksonville City Council voted to spend $15 million over the next 5 years to reduce the number of septic tanks.
Initially, we will get this first 1,000 septic tanks remediated in hopefully 3 to 4 years, but certainly within the first 5, and keep working away at our list.
There are currently some 21,000 septic tanks in designated neighborhoods that the health department has identified as critical. So getting rid of 1,000 of them, that hardly addresses the growing dilemma.
I can tell you septic systems are a problem statewide for a lot of our springs, and we've done the calculations, and to retrofit what we need to fix our septic system problem for springs, it's upwards of $2.4 billion.
Right now we have a major problem where we're continuing to put septic tanks in the ground even though we know they're going to have to take them out.
A high percentage of Florida waterways are impaired because of nitrogen and fecal coliform bacteria. You've got manure and fertilizers seeping in from farms. You've got wastewater from utilities and industry, all seeping chemicals like mercury.
There are absolutely direct local sources of mercury in a number of different communities, and addressing the potential impact of those local discharges has really been largely ignored.
We've seen mercury all up and down all of Florida's water bodies, not just the St. Johns River.
With all the new development coming in, people don't want to eat the fish, they're afraid to eat the shrimp.
The levels of pollutants that are measured in fish are safely consumed if you eat fish about once every 2 weeks. If you eat fish more often than that, then you potentially have a problem.
Throughout Florida, there are subsistence fishermen who feed their families on the fish they catch every day. Construction site runoff is another growing problem facing our waterways. The soil from these sites accumulate and end up burying aquatic life, disrupting the food chain, degrading water quality, and adversely impacting our recreational opportunities.
The public needs to be better educated about its potential impact on the river continually. We need to be constantly keeping an eye out for the dangers we don't know about.
And there's plenty of debate over the dangers we do know about. Just this summer, the Florida Department of Environmental Protection voted to change water quality standards. The DEP's Environmental Regulatory Commission voted to increase the limits on nearly a dozen cancer-causing chemicals that are discharged into our surface waters.
When we plug the science into the formulas, some get more stringent, some get less stringent. We live with that number. We protect our citizens.
I'm not aware of that science. I can't find a scientist who is. So I don't believe that that's the truth. I think that they relaxed the chemical, the limits on clean water to business interests, probably including fracking interest.
For the most part, industry is doing exactly what they're allowed to do. They are allowed to discharge into our waterways and into our air pounds and tons of chemicals that we know can be ultimately harmful not only for the environment but human health.
You need to get ready for more pollution, more algae, more mortality, unless all of us get together and figure out a way to do something different.
Failing septic tanks, stormwater runoff from development, industrial pollution and fertilizer, all leaching into our groundwater, damaging our habitats and wetlands. These are consequences to our future. Coming up, who is using, who is hurting, and who is protecting our river.
In 2015, we had 100 million people visit the state in 2015 as a record. And they're saying by 2030, we're going to have another 50 million.
I mean, our state law says that there will be water for all reasonable and beneficial uses, which just completely ignores that water is a finite resource.
And the more we draw water out without replenishing it, the more and more potential tragedy we have.
Save big. Save now at Key Buick GMC. You pay what we pay on any new Buick Regal or Verano in stock. That's up to $5,000 in savings. Or lease a new Buick Encore for just $165 per month. Service, sales, reputation. Visit KeyBuickGMC.com.
Social Security is sometimes the only thing that stands between having a roof over your head, food on the table, and being homeless. At Morgan & Morgan, we have a Social Security section devoted to helping you. Whether you're applying for benefits or been denied, I invite you to visit forthepeople.com and learn more. When you visit, you can learn what benefits you're entitled to and what injuries and mental illnesses qualify for both Social Security and VA benefits. Morgan & Morgan, for the people.
Need kids furniture? Right now, during the Rooms to Go Kids and Teens Holiday Sale, check this out. Get these awesome rooms for just $7.99 or finance for 60 months and pay just $14 a month interest-free. Really, anything $7.99, just $14 a month interest-free. So don't miss the Rooms to Go Kids and Teens Holiday Sale.
It's everything you wanted, let the world know. Decorating's easy at Rooms to Go.
They have big.
You really are a genius.
Brains.
I Googled how to do that.
The Big Bang Theory.
Tune in tonight to The Big Bang Theory at 9 and 9:30. Brought to you exclusively by Xfinity. Call 1-800-XFINITY today for a great offer.
Key GMC on Southside is Jacksonville's truck headquarters. Save up to $10,000 off MSRP on select GMC Sierras and GMC Yukons in stock. Or lease a GMC Terrain for as low as $179 per month. Service, sales, reputation. Visit KeyBuickGMC.com today.
Why are they gassing your steak at the supermarket? It's supposed to keep meat looking bright red and fresh. But is it always safe to eat? What you need to know when you go to the supermarket. Next, Inside Edition.
Monday at 7:30 on Channel 4.
Robbie Scholl's been crabbing on this river since he was a child. These crabs have always been his source of income and his love.
$10 a week to a kid that's 12 years old, pretty good money, especially in 1958. And it just became a passion. Most of the time I put in an 8-hour day, at least 6 days a week. So it's just I'd say a labor of love. I just enjoy being outside.
Robbie's one of hundreds of people who make their living on the St. Johns and its tributaries. They're often seen, but not noticed. They work, support their families, and provide food for thousands.
We should never forget that what happens out here, that commercial crabber over there and all these crab floats and the folks that are out here throwing shrimp nets, and to a great extent the commercial shrimp fishery on the beach is dependent on this thing being healthy.
Ben Williams grew up on the St. Johns and made a living selling seafood as a commercial fisherman.
You know, for some people it's just, I cross the Buckman Bridge over the St. Johns, or I eat over at one of the fish camps and look over the St. Johns, and that's as far as it goes.
Well, they don't understand how much economic value comes out of the thing. And most people think, oh, it's a river, that's a great place to run big ships up so we can unload. This river is, in essence, an estuary. Marine shrimp, Atlantic white shrimp, there's millions of them right here within 1,000 yards of us because it's summertime and they're working the river right now.
Estuaries work because you have fresh water that flows in and meets salt water coming up with the tides, and it's that balance of fresh and salt water that produces the unique conditions which support species like blue crabs and shrimp and hundreds of species of fish. And if that salt balance is out of whack, which it is right now, you start to see declines in both the commercial and recreational catches of many species of fish.
The health of the St. Johns is important not only to the fishing industry, but to tourism and quality of life.
Nobody ever moved here from any state to Florida because we have the best strip malls. They come to here because of the idea of Florida, and that's what we have to preserve.
People come here for our ecosystems. They recreate on our ecosystems. It's like a hub for tourism.
People come here from all over the world, spend money to fly into Florida, stay in our hotels, eat in our restaurants, buy souvenirs to take home, and take pictures of our natural beauty. And that's the best type of visitor, is taking pictures and leaving, and not leaving a large footprint except for their dollar.
And probably about 75% of our business is directly from paddle sports. So the health of the waterways around North Florida is a big deal. The Atlantic Ocean, the Intercoastal Waterway, and probably most importantly, the St. Johns River.
Natural resources provide an economic benefit to providing us infrastructure that we aren't putting a value on, and it's called ecosystem services. And our natural resources can be buffers for storms. They can clean up polluted waters before they get into our waterways. They have this amazing ability to clean our air and to provide for food for us.
That food's not only fish and crabs that come from the river, Commercial farms cover 9.5 million acres of Florida's land, and they all need clean water. The agency responsible for making sure everyone gets that clean water in our watershed is the St. Johns River Water Management District.
So we do regulatory permitting, both consumptive use permitting of water and also environmental resource permitting to make sure that we can do the best job possible protecting the environment.
The limits of the consumptive use permit, or CUP, are based on need and whether or not the water source can support the withdrawal. But some critics say those guidelines are often disregarded.
We in the state of Florida ever seen a consumptive use permit we don't like?
Very, very few consumptive use permits are denied. And when they are denied, it's usually because of extreme public pressure that's been brought to bear.
According to the Water Management District, over the last 10 years, out of the 2,800 CUPs applied for, only 14 were denied. Smart says the system is designed to make it difficult for permits to be denied.
If a water management district were to choose to deny a permit because of a minimum flow and level, then their whole water supply plan would have to be reviewed by the Department of Environmental Protection. Huge bureaucratic undertaking, and they would have to redo this plan. So there are hurdles and obstacles put in the way of folks who would even want to deny a permit.
The actual permitted quantities for both surface water and groundwater went down last year. So that's kind of a surprise for a lot of people.
Saying that the permitted quantities of water went down is like saying that you lowered the speed limit on the roads. It says nothing about how fast people are driving. We do not even monitor how much the permit holders are using throughout most of the state, and that's intentional.
Under a law passed by the 2016 legislature, water management districts are required to monitor water that flows through pipes with a diameter of 8 inches or larger. They are not required to monitor pipes or several pipes that measure smaller than 8 inches in diameter.
So they're not really trying to monitor anyone. So it's one thing to talk about permitted, but what we need to be talking about is actual use, and we need laws in place to at least know how much water is being used.
Conservationists contend that we have already permitted too much water use. Most geologists contend overpumping the aquifer is the leading cause of sinkholes.
So, while we're losing water pressure underground, there's increasing pressure on clean water above ground.
In 2015, we had 100 million people visit the state in 2015. It was a record. And they're saying by 2030, we're going to have another 50 million. In light of those kinds of growth expectations and the impacts that come with it, holy cow.
And speaking of cows, there's Deseret Ranch, just a few miles from the Orlando airport. It stretches along 40 miles of the St. Johns Riverbank. For now, it is a cattle ranch, but developers hope to change that.
It's 133,000 acres, the largest development that we have ever had planned in the state of Florida in history. It's the size of Orlando, Winter Park, Winter Garden, and Apopka put together. It's massive.
The plan for the property owned by the Mormon Church is to be home for 500,000, 500,000 people. And that means there'll be houses, apartments, schools, offices, buildings, and guess what? They all use water.
They anticipate 111 million gallons of water per day will be needed in the future for this development.
Deseret plans to meet that need by keeping water from getting to the St. Johns River by damming 2 of its tributaries. Even without considering the impact of the enormous Deseret Ranch, Central Florida is pushing the aquifer's limits. That's why the Water Management District is considering drawing up a plan that includes pulling 160 million gallons of water a day from the St. Johns River. For people who live in communities downstream, including Palatka and Jacksonville, that's a cause of great concern. It makes them worry about the St. Johns River's future.
And what happens when you reduce that freshwater flow, you start getting more salt water into the St. Johns from the mouth. And when you get more salt water going further upstream, it does damage to the wetlands, to the grasses. Those are the kidneys of the river. And so you start reducing the river's ability to cleanse itself and naturally filter out those pollutants that continuously are put into the river. And so it does a huge damage to water quality.
A recent study by the University of Florida shows that over the next 5 decades, The state's sprawling development, including rooftops, parking lots, and roads, will cover as much as a third of the state's landscape. Many say true growth management in the state ended several years ago.
Come 2011, the legislature decided to gut our Growth Management Act. They took away Department of Community Affairs and recreated the Department of Economic Opportunity, and they stripped away all the teeth within the Growth Management Act. So it really left us without any oversight.
The focus of the combined Economic Growth Department is job creation.
But DEO, Department of Economic Opportunity, really is tasked with not opposing anything because they don't want to be a job killer.
So when it comes to growth, without any incentives, it makes more economic sense for a builder to develop on inexpensive open land instead of where development has already begun.
Business will take the opportunity and destroy a natural system in order to make the profit. And they'll do it because that's the American way. It's been that way for hundreds of years. Only until recently have we learned the significance of protecting natural systems.
If you want to pave a spring, the state's going to stop you. But they're not really caring about what is and is not appropriate development. That's really up to local communities, local governments, which means it's up to the local people who live there.
The state needs to incentivize, and local governments need to examine their local comprehensive plans and their land use regulations, as well as impact fees, about incentivizing more urban infill.
It's been said that threats to our river amount to death by 1,000 cuts. Stormwater runoff, septic tanks, urban sprawl, agriculture. But there's one more proposed cut. If it happens, it's going to be deep and very expensive.
After 300 miles of abuse from growth and development, Jacksport plans to spend nearly $800 million to dredge the last 13 miles of the river, clawing open an even greater path from the sea.
The more that the river is turned into a highway, it's of concern for manatees, it's of concern for water quality, it's of concern for what's going to happen to the vegetation.
There are too many unknowns in the impact of the dredging, environmentally as well as economically.
We've seen the track record of the Army Corps of Engineers and how many times the impacts have been much greater than what they anticipated. And yet in this case, they have virtually no mitigation to offset those potential impacts.
There's going to be impacts. They've underplayed the impacts to salinity. There's no question about that. They've underplayed the cumulative impacts. How long have we been dredging the St. Johns River? 100 years. How many different projects have people said, don't worry, it's not going to cause a problem? And the next one won't cause a problem. And the next one won't cause it. Well, that's cumulative impacts. You start backing them up, and pretty soon we've got high salinity water coming out of the Atlantic and killing our submerged grasses around the city of Jacksonville. That's related to historical dredging. I know it, they know it, they just don't want to admit it. I work for ports. I've been a consultant for 5 different ports in the state of Florida, on the side of dredging and on the side of mitigation. I know how it works, and the Jacksport should know it too. Their mitigation plan is woefully inadequate. If you're going to spend close to $1 billion on a project, you should be able to spin off some money for that and do an adequate mitigation program.
According to an economic study done at the University of North Florida, it would cost billions to duplicate the water filtering ability of the St. Johns River. Based on the cost of processing wastewater, the study determined the wetlands provide up to $122 billion worth of nitrogen removal each year.
No component of the economy is more important than natural systems. You destroy the natural systems and the economy of Florida is going to go down the tubes.
In order to have a healthy economy, you've got to have a healthy river. You've got to have a healthy environment.
You can protect the environment while creating a strong economy. In fact, a strong economy depends on a healthy, strong river.
Simply put, all water in Florida is connected. As we've seen, our drinking water and the food we eat all depend on clean water from the aquifers, springs, and our St. Johns River. Runoff, sprawl, and development, the fertilizers and pesticides used on our lawns, at farms, and chemicals from industry all create pollution and damage to our valuable water. When we combine these problems with the impacts from future growth, we have a recipe for disaster. There are consequences to our actions. We are all accountable. Coming up, we're going to see what community members and government officials are doing or not doing to protect our river.
many of the best scientists in these water management districts have been fired.
The sad thing is our elected officials, they've turned their back on Florida's environment and our waterways, and they've turned their back on citizens.
Pollution is our worst enemy, with the politician hanging on its tail.
5,000 years of Chinese music and dance in one night.
I have never seen a production any better than this anywhere.
5-star.
I was just blown away.
A cultural phenomenon.
I learned more in this performance than I actually do in a whole week of school.
It was special for us.
It's so spiritual and uplifting.
It really healed me.
It's kind of magical.
Well, about 12 years ago, we were having financial problems. And as soon as we walked through the door, Todd put us at ease.
Todd was more interested in helping us find a solution to our problems rather than focusing on what caused us to come into his office into the first place.
When people ask me, I go see Todd.
Todd was there for us.
Visit our website at toddhenrylaw.com. Our office is located on Kingsley Avenue in Orange Park. We're here for you.
American Signature Furniture presents How to Know When It's Time. First, look for a sign that it's time to buy new furniture. Any sign? At all. Then, follow the signs of the Black Friday preview sale at American Signature Furniture. Hurry in for incredible savings, plus 36 months no interest financing when you spend $19.99 and up. Perfect. And that's how to buy the perfect piece at American Signature Furniture.
So at the department, really our mission is to kind of safeguard our natural resources, make sure we have good, sustainable ecosystems. And the particular challenge with the St. Johns River that we faced with the local communities was making sure that it had good water quality to support diversity of wildlife and habitat and those types of things so that we could enjoy it, fish in it, and recreate in it.
In my opinion, Florida has the best water law in the country. So from Florida statute, the water management districts and DEP put rules into place for to execute the missions that are provided for in Florida statute.
No one's being held accountable for their pollution. Agriculture's getting off the hook, industry's getting off the hook. Our state governments basically opened up the doors to allow the polluters to come in and rewrite the rules and rewrite the laws.
It's been said whiskey's for drinking, water's for fighting over. In the Old West, where water was scarce, there were plenty of fights. People were shot over water use. Here in Florida, where water is plentiful, there hasn't been any violence. And the soldiers in this war, they're not cowboys. They're lawyers, politicians, lobbyists.
I've been up at the legislature the last 3 years trying to get stronger laws to protect Silver Springs and in the St. Johns River and the Algae River. We've been frustrated at every turn by the hundreds of lobbyists that are representing private interests, people that are actually making their money by extracting these resources, extracting the water, first of all, for free, which is used by industry and by development and by agriculture with really no public interest involved in how they use it.
During the economic downturn, while there were many jobs lost, lobbyists were busy at work in Tallahassee, opening up the books and creating loopholes in our water quality protections. And so now we've lost 4 decades worth of regulations and protections to keep the pollution out.
DEP seems to think that their job is to promote industry. I think their job should be to protect the public.
Regulations is a dirty word in Tallahassee right now, but these regulations are protections, and protections are critically important to make sure that we're investing wisely now so we won't have to pay the higher price later.
In the past few years, probably the most damaging thing that has happened has been the appointees to the St. John's Water Management District Board and the other water management district boards.
Unlike times in the past, our governor is no longer appointing strong environmentalists to serve on water management district governing boards.
And all of them have basically business interests that run counter to protecting the environment.
It's no longer, to me, a serious purpose for them to be on the board so that they can fix serious water management problems. They're there to carry out the political directives out of Tallahassee.
The current governor came into office and slashed and burned the budget on environmental issues. Now we're seeing the consequences of that.
Look at what's happening to the environmental problems around the state now. They're growing like a bad algae, you know, in a dark room, and it's going to consume this state.
Well, now instead of having the best science make these decisions, many of the best scientists in these water management districts have been fired.
Since Governor Rick Scott took office, the agencies responsible for protecting our environment have endured significant budget cuts and laid off hundreds of workers. The St. Johns River Water Management District and DEP each lost 20% of their workforce.
The employee numbers, those are going to change. Those are going to up and down. We did have a recession.
Without a doubt, our most valuable asset is our people. And it doesn't matter if they're the scientists, the lead engineers, or the support staff that make sure we get our paychecks, for example. So we have people that we need in 4 different offices up and down our district, and they make sure that they get the job done. That requires focus, but they're dedicated and they're kicking it right now.
We've seen a real brain drain at our state agencies. It's really critical that we have good scientists, good people working. There's still some good people there, just not enough of them. They don't have the resources to do their jobs.
And therefore, bad decisions are made or bad decisions go unchallenged because there aren't people with the kind of reputation in the science of hydrology or whatever is appropriate to challenge bad decisions.
There's good people still in our agencies. Unfortunately, they feel threatened, their job security feels threatened because if they do their job and they hold polluters accountable, they may lose their jobs.
We clearly have exceeded the capacity of pumping water out of the aquifer. The people who said that 3 years ago no longer work at the Water Management District. They've all been fired. That sends a powerful message to everybody working there. Well, don't go tell the truth, or make sure you tell our version of the truth, because you're going to cause problems otherwise.
So you're saying politics are at play that are killing the St. John's?
Oh yeah, exactly.
Some of the scientists we spoke with who were fired or frankly gave up said the impact of politics on their work was nothing short of profound. Because they work in such a specialized field and they worried about their jobs and ability to support their family, they couldn't talk on camera about that political pressure.
One who is not afraid is Jim Gross, a former assistant division director and geologist for the St. John's District, who's now the executive director of Florida Defenders of the Environment.
Has the science been compromised by the political agenda? Most definitely, yes. Unfortunately, it's very difficult for me to have to say yes, but that has occurred. Let me give you some examples. I mean, the district water supply plan that came out in December of 2013 is perhaps the best example of this. After it had been out on the street for public review and for several months, there was a meeting inside the agency to discuss it. And this was senior level folks that met together, and it was announced by the second in command in the agency that this water supply plan could not ever be brought before the governing board for approval because it was not politically acceptable. It might jeopardize the governor's re-election campaign. And so we were told, in no uncertain terms, change the data and the results in the plan to meet the political agenda.
We made several requests to interview Governor Scott, but he was not available.
I mean, the sad thing is our elected officials, they've turned their back on Florida's environment and our waterways, and they've turned their back on citizens. They're not fulfilling their constitutional mandate to protect our waterways, to protect our lands. And that's, you know, it makes me angry. It makes me angry as someone that is in charge of protecting these waterways, but it makes me angry as a mom. You know, I've got 2 kids depending on these waterways. They love to fish every weekend, and I'm not sure if it's safe for my skinny 7-year-old to eat fish out of Florida waters every weekend.
In 2014, the people of Florida voted with a landslide, 75%, to amend the state constitution to provide a dedicated funding source for purchasing lands for conservation and protecting the water. But what we soon learned was that the majority of legislators voted to ignore their new constitutional responsibility.
They've used these funds for workers' comp insurance. They've used these funds that should be dedicated for acquisition of public lands, for maintenance of lands and roads that aren't even in part of the conservation program. They're using it for seat cushions for office workers. I mean, there's more, more than $250 million of this dedicated funding has been misappropriated, and we believe it's a constitutional violation.
We are engaged in litigation against the state of Florida to try to see if we can bring that money back to the people where they wanted it, spend it.
We as Floridians deserve that this constitutional amendment be fulfilled and that the will of the voters to invest this dedicated funding go to conservation land and not ongoing maintenance issues that may or may not have anything to do with protecting our waterways.
Well, I can tell you that the governor has absolutely asked for the money to fix the Everglades, to fix Lake Okeechobee, to fix any river lagoon, to fix our springs. We've got unprecedented levels of money coming into springs restoration at $50 million a year. 5 years ago, it wasn't even funded. So you have a lot of Amendment 1 restoration dollars getting appropriated for our ecosystems. It's happening.
The line item for Forever Florida used to be $300 million, and now it's whittled down to 15. Do the math. We cannot do the things that we are supposed to do in terms of making sure that we conserve lands for public use and for sustainability.
The legislature passed a water bill which I think significantly weakened the standards for water, particularly things like how much water can a individual or a firm or a farm pull out of the ground and under what conditions can they do it. It's now kind of Wild West time.
You know, it's all about jobs, and the politicians that they're answering to don't seem to understand that in order to have a healthy economy, we've got to have a healthy environment. And that's the job of everybody.
Coming up, we'll find out that Florida is not doomed yet. We'll find out how connections in Tallahassee can be used to generate better consequences when troubled waters continues.
If you can't do things that have like a big impact, do things that have a small impact, because altogether we're making a change.
If we truly want to make a difference about how our government's treating our environment or how our government is failing our environment, we must band together and stand up for these waterways.
Everyone living everywhere in Florida should speak up.
Save big. Save now at Key Buick GMC. You pay what we pay on any new Buick Regal or Verano in stock. That's up to $5,000 in savings. Or lease a new Buick Encore for just $165 per month. Service, sales, reputation. Visit KeyBuickGMC.com.
It was one of those things that there's a lot of moving pieces that are happening, a lot of things that are going on at those crazy times. And I always felt as though I was his only client. Todd has he's really always been there for us, and I always felt as though I could trust him and that he had my best interest at hand.
Visit our website at toddhenrylaw.com. Our office is located on Kingsley Avenue in Orange Park. We're here for you.
Now, how's that thing supposed to convince anyone to buy a car?
It's just full of hot air and doesn't say much.
Like the labels you see on a lot of chicken packaging.
The ones that say raised without antibiotics. That's just a trick to get you to pay more money.
Fact is, by federal law, all chickens must be clear of antibiotics before they leave the farm.
It's a marketing gimmick, like Mr. Floppy Arms here. Though I must say, he is somewhat hypnotic.
Don't fall for the hype, Dale. Dale?
Fresh, delicious chicken.
from Sanderson Farms.
Key GMC on Southside is Jacksonville's truck headquarters. Save up to $10,000 off MSRP on select GMC Sierras and GMC Yukons in stock. Or lease a GMC Terrain for as low as $179 per month. Service, sales, reputation. Visit KeyBuickGMC.com today.
You got your name, frequent flyer number.
A consumer alert.
It'll make me think twice before I throw this away.
Your boarding pass, a one-way ticket to identity theft. Your name and flight can be stolen.
How long did it take you to do that?
The hacker's greatest weapon that takes less than a second to use.
Scary, very scary.
And the two things you can do to keep your private info safe in plain sight. Monday on the 10 o'clock news.
For the better part of the hour, we've talked about the actions that we in government have taken that have had a negative consequence on the health of our river, our economy, and even our way of life. But we have it in our power to change the course of the future. And there are people who are taking matters into their own hands and doing just that. The city of DeBary was quietly planning to develop 100 acres of the 900-acre preserve around Gemini Springs. But it didn't stay quiet.
Another reporter said, hey, there's something going on down there. They want to use part of Gemini Springs. And so we wrote this story, and then it just seemed like the citizens came out of nowhere.
I was in shock. All of us were. You know, it's what? What are they doing? You know, seriously, they're trying to develop on conservation land.
And Mary Sue Scott, this resident from DeBary, who's there almost every day with her family, had never really been involved in any kind of a community project before, just started going to town.
I created a petition and spread it on social media, and it spread like wildfire. The first day we had 500 signatures, and it grew in, 1,000 here, 1,000 there. And I had immediate help from so many people emailing me, messaging me, what can I do to help?
She was not a community activist, not one of these people who goes to routine meetings and learns how to stand up for the environment. She was just a regular person who saw something happening in her backyard and knew that it felt wrong.
Mary Sue reached out to the St. John's Riverkeeper, the Audubon Society, and every other environmental organization she could find. Over the course of a few months, they had the attention of the Water Management District, Volusia County, and the local city council.
We have a councilman who I had already sent the petition to all of them, and weeks later he emailed me and asked me, can you send me that petition again? And I emailed him back and said, why, are you going to sign it? And he just wrote back, no, numbers speak.
In the end, the Water Management Board voted to transfer ownership of the preservation land to Volusia County and required a conservation easement that should protect this public land forever.
The DeBary story is one example of what can happen if we hold our public officials accountable. One motivated person energized a grassroots movement and changed the course of events. Together, we can make a difference. If we truly value our rivers and our waterways, we will give them a voice. If we do, there is hope. If not, the consequences can be tragic. Our waters need us now.
If you can't do things that have like a big impact, do things that have a small impact, because altogether we're making a change.
Alicia Smith volunteers with the Rising Tides, a young adults group, and helps the St. John's Riverkeeper and North Florida Land Trust organize regular cleanups along our waterways.
Also, we try to let people know on a smaller level that they can do things every single day. You don't have to go to these like big festivals, but just take a walk around your neighborhood. That is getting involved.
And Robert Field did just that. He was just out for his morning walk when he saw city workers with leaf blowers at the Jacksonville Landing.
They were blowing basically everything in their path just out of the way and into the river. And I stopped them and I was like, what are you doing with the leaf blower? Like, this is just going in the river. And they said, well, that's how we're told to do it. I ended up reaching out to the director of the Parks Department. I copied the mayor of Jacksonville on it. And then I sent a separate email to all of the city council members. So after some back and forth and talking to them and getting the Jacksonville Environmental Agency involved as well, they realized that they hadn't been training their staff properly. They weren't following the right protocols. So what ended up happening is over 100 parks maintenance staff workers have to go through retraining so they're more aware of how to clean up areas that are along the river and along creeks and along watersheds.
All of us have a stake in what our impacts are to the river. So whether it's just cleaning up your own yard, making sure that you yourself are not the cause or the source of pollution into the waterway, that alone is going to be the greatest impact that we can have. You know, every single person adds up, and every single person's little piece of lawn, little piece of yard, little piece of property, that is the St. Johns River watershed, and that's what makes up the St. Johns River watershed. The ultimate location where it's all going is going to be the St. Johns River.
Fact is, we are all involved whether we want to be or not. We've seen that all Florida waterways are connected. We've seen the connections between growth and agriculture, between politics and protection. We've seen how citizens groups and individuals can make a difference. And now it's up to you to decide how your action or inaction will have consequences on our troubled waters.
At the time of the greatest threat, did we step forward and do our part in saving what is best of our Florida? Will our great-grandchildren look back and say with pride, look what my great-grandmama and great-granddaddy did for this state?
It's our river. We own it. We need to take responsibility for it. And if we get involved by holding our government agencies accountable, if we elect good people that are going to work for the river and work for us, and then we reach out and keep relationships with those elected officials and hold them accountable, get involved when decisions are being made that affect the future of the river, and we make sure our voices are heard, we can protect the river. I'm optimistic that the future's bright, but it's going to take the citizens getting involved and making a difference.
The St. Johns River needs us now. Florida's rivers, springs, and water. It's time to take action and stand up for Florida's waters.